Warren Sawyer had been scraping frost off the root cellar door for 5 solid minutes before he realized the lock had been broken from the inside. The isolated farmstead 12 miles from the nearest neighbor had been his inheritance after his father died in the border wars, a place so remote that the tax collector only bothered to visit every 3rd year. Warren had spent the autumn months preparing for winter alone, salting meat and storing root vegetables in the underground cellar that his grandfather had dug into the hillside decades ago. He had not expected to find squatters when he went to retrieve turnips for his evening stew. The heavy wooden door swung open with its familiar groan, and Warren descended the earthen steps with his lantern raised high. The golden light swept across barrels of apples and hanging bundles of dried herbs before illuminating a sight that made him freeze on the bottom step. A massive orc woman crouched in the far corner, her green skin almost luminous in the lamplight, her amber eyes wide with the cornered desperation of a wild animal. 3 small children huddled behind her broad shoulders, their tiny tusks barely visible as they peered around her protective bulk. "Please," the woman said, her voice rough but clear. "Please do not hurt my children." Warren stood perfectly still, his mind racing through a dozen reactions before settling on the most practical. The orc woman was thin, far too thin for someone of her considerable frame. The children looked gaunt, their pointed ears drooping against their heads. Empty flour sacks lay scattered near them, and Warren recognized the burlap from his own stores. "How long have you been down here?" he asked quietly. The orc woman's amber eyes narrowed with suspicion. 3 days. "We ate only what we needed. I can work to repay you, please." Warren set the lantern on a barrel and slowly sat down on the bottom step, making himself less threatening. "It is the dead of winter. Where did you come from?" "The eastern mountains. My clan cast me out." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pulled the children closer. "These are my sister's children. She died in childbirth. I refused to abandon them to exposure, so the elders said I was weak. They drove us into the snow." The smallest child whimpered, and the orc woman began humming a low, rhythmic tune that seemed to soothe the little one. Warren studied them in the lamplight. The children could not have been more than 4, 6, and 8 years old. Their little faces were pinched with hunger and cold despite the relative warmth of the underground cellar. "What is your name?" Warren asked. "Grushna." She pronounced it with a guttural sound he was not sure he could replicate. "These are Kala, Fen, and Little Tusk. I am Warren." He stood slowly, and Grushna tensed like a bowstring. "Stay here. I will bring food." "You are not going to kill us." The naked fear in her voice made Warren's chest ache. "No, I am going to feed you." He climbed back up the stairs and emerged into the bitter cold of the late afternoon. The wind howled across the empty fields, driving snow against the weathered barn and the small stone house where Warren lived alone. He hurried inside and began pulling together everything he could carry. Bread, cheese, a jar of preserved peaches, strips of dried venison, and a skin of water. On impulse, he grabbed the heavy quilt from his bed and tucked it under his arm. When he returned to the cellar, Grushna had not moved, but her eyes tracked his every movement with an intensity that spoke of years learning not to trust. Warren set the food down within her reach, but did not approach closer. "Eat," he said simply. Grushna stared at the provisions as if they might be a trap. Then the oldest child, Kala, broke away and grabbed the bread with both hands. The dam broke, and all 3 children fell upon the food with the graceless desperation of starvation. Grushna watched them eat with such naked relief on her face that Warren had to look away. "The quilt is for them," he said gruffly. "It gets cold at night, even down here." "Why are you doing this?" Grushna's voice was barely a whisper. Warren thought about his father, who had died fighting orcs on the border. He thought about the stories he had heard his whole life about the savage green-skinned raiders who knew nothing but violence. Then he looked at the 3 small children wrapped in his grandmother's quilt, their bellies finally full, their eyes already drooping with exhausted sleep. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said. Over the following days, Warren fell into a strange new rhythm. Each morning, he would bring food to the cellar and spend a few minutes sitting on the bottom step, talking to Grushna while the children played quiet games in their underground sanctuary. Each evening, he would return with whatever he had cooked for his own dinner, always making extra portions. Grushna began to relax by degrees. She stopped flinching when he descended the stairs. She answered his questions about orc customs and the harsh life in the mountain clans. She even laughed once when little Tusk tried to climb into one of the apple barrels and got stuck. "I cannot keep you down here all winter," Warren said on the 5th day. "The cellar is too cold and too damp. The children need sunlight." Grushna's expression shuddered immediately. "You want us to leave?" "No, I want you to come up to the house." The silence stretched so long that Warren could hear his own heartbeat. Grushna stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "You would let orcs into your home. You are not orcs. You are Grushna, Kala, Fen, and Tusk, and yes, I would let you into my home." "Why?" The word was almost a plea. "Why do you help us? What do you want?" Warren met her amber eyes steadily. "I want nothing except to know that 3 children are not freezing in my root cellar. Is that so hard to believe?" Grushna stood abruptly, her head nearly brushing the cellar ceiling. She was taller than Warren by at least half a foot, her shoulders broad and muscled despite her obvious malnourishment. "Yes, humans do not help orcs. They hunt us. They kill us. They sell our children to slavers. I am not going to do any of those things. How do I know that?" Warren spread his hands helplessly. "You do not. You will just have to trust me." That night, Grushna and the 3 children climbed the cellar stairs and entered Warren's small stone house. The children gasped at the warmth from the fireplace, and Tusk immediately ran to press his small green hands against the heated stones. Warren had prepared a stew of venison and root vegetables, and he ladled generous portions into wooden bowls while Grushna stood rigidly near the door, as if ready to flee at any moment. "Sit," Warren said, gesturing to the table. "Eat." Slowly, carefully, Grushna sat. The children climbed onto the benches beside her, and for a few minutes, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the quiet slurp of eating. Warren watched them from his own seat, feeling something warm and unfamiliar uncurl in his chest. "There is a loft above," he said after they had finished. "It is not much, but it is warm and dry. I put down straw and blankets. You and the children can sleep there." Grushna's voice was barely audible. "Where will you sleep?" "Down here by the fire. I have done it before." "That is your bed. Your home. And I am offering to share it." Warren stood and began clearing the bowls. "You are exhausted, Grushna. Let yourself rest." That night, Warren lay awake on the floor near the fireplace, listening to the soft sounds of breathing from the loft above. He thought about what he had done, taking in a fugitive orc woman and 3 half-starved children. If anyone found out, he could be arrested, or worse. The standing bounty on orc refugees was substantial, enough to pay his taxes for several years. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was the way Grushna had looked at him when he offered them shelter like he had handed her the moon itself. The winter deepened, and the small stone house that had once echoed with Warren's solitary footsteps filled with new life. Kala, the oldest at 8 years, began following Warren around during his morning chores, her questions endless and eager. Fen, quieter and more thoughtful, would sit by the fire and carefully tend it, adding wood with a seriousness that made Warren smile. Little Tusk, barely 4, attached himself to Grushna's leg and refused to let go for the first week. Grushna herself remained wary, though Warren could see her slowly beginning to believe that she and the children were truly safe. She insisted on helping with every task, her considerable strength making light work of hauling water from the well and splitting firewood. Warren found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way her dark hair fell in thick waves past her shoulders, the graceful economy of her movements despite her size, the gentle patience she showed the children even when she was clearly exhausted. "You are staring again," Grushna said one morning, catching him looking as she kneaded bread dough with powerful hands. Warren felt heat creep up his neck. "Sorry, I was just thinking that you are good at that. My mother taught me to bake before she died." Grushna's voice went soft. "She said that any woman worth her salt should be able to feed her family no matter what. She sounds like she was wise. She was. She also told me I was too gentle for clan life, that my heart would get me killed." Grushna laughed bitterly. She was right. Warren moved closer, drawn by the sadness in her voice. "Being gentle is not a weakness. It is among orcs." She punched the dough harder than necessary. "Strength is all that matters, strength and the ability to survive. I failed at both. You carried 3 children through mountain snows in the dead of winter and kept them alive for 3 days on stolen flour and frozen apples. That sounds like strength to me." Grushna's hand stilled. She looked up at him, her amber eyes searching his face for mockery or deceit. Finding neither, she ducked her head quickly, but not before Warren saw the sheen of tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The first real thaw came in early spring, and with it, a problem. Warren's stores were running dangerously low, depleted by months of feeding 5 mouths instead of 1. He would need to make the long journey to the trading post to buy supplies, a trip that would take 3 days round journey. "I do not want to leave you alone that long," he said over dinner, frowning into his stew. "We will be fine," Grushna assured him. "I can handle the farm chores. I have been watching you all winter. It is not the chores I am worried about. If anyone comes by, then we will hide. Warren, you have to go. We cannot survive on turnips and hope." He knew she was right, but the thought of leaving them unprotected made his stomach churn. Still, there was no other choice. The next morning he hitched his horse to the wagon, loaded the few furs and preserved goods he had to trade, and prepared to depart. Grushna walked him to the wagon, the children trailing behind her like ducklings. In the pale spring sunlight, her green skin seemed to glow, and Warren found himself memorizing the details of her face as if he might forget them. "Be safe," she said quietly. "You too. If anything happens, anything at all, take the children and hide in the forest. There is a cave about 2 miles northeast near the lightning-struck oak. Do you remember where I showed you?" "I remember." She hesitated, then reached out and gripped his forearm in the orc fashion of farewell. Her hand was warm and calloused and strong. "Come back." "I will," Warren promised. The journey to the trading post was uneventful, and Warren conducted his business quickly, trading his goods for flour, salt, sugar, and other necessities. He was loading the last sack onto his wagon when he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "I am telling you, there are orc tracks all over the northern valleys," a grizzled hunter was saying to a cluster of men. "Fresh ones. A female and some younglings, looks like. The magistrate has authorized a hunting party. There is a bounty of 50 silver pieces." 50 silver for some orc trash, another man scoffed. "Hardly seems worth the effort." "It is the principle of the thing," the hunter insisted. "We cannot have them thinking they can just wander onto human lands whenever they please. We find them, we make an example." Warren forced himself to finish loading calmly, to nod politely to the men as he passed, to climb onto his wagon seat without hurry. Only when he was out of sight of the trading post did he urge his horse into a run, the wagon rattling dangerously behind him. He drove through the night, stopping only to rest the horse briefly before pushing on again. The sun was rising when he finally crested the hill overlooking his farm, and his heart seized in his chest. Smoke was rising from beyond the barn. Warren abandoned the wagon and ran, his boots pounding the muddy earth, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He rounded the barn and stopped short. Grushna stood in the yard with an axe in her hands, facing down two mounted men in leather armor. Behind her, the three children huddled against the side of the house. "I said leave," Grushna snarled, her tusks bared. "This is not your land." "This is human land, orc," one of the men said. He had a crossbow aimed at Grushna's chest. "And you are trespassing. The law says we can kill you on sight. The law also says you cannot murder people on private property without the owner's permission," Warren called out, striding forward with more confidence than he felt. "And I am the owner. Lower your weapon." The two men turned to stare at him. The one with the crossbow lowered it slightly, confusion written across his face. "You are Warren Sawyer. We were told this farm was abandoned. It is not. It is mine, and you are trespassing." Warren moved to stand beside Grushna, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Whatever business you think you have here, you are mistaken. This orc and her brats were reported in the area," the second man said. "We have authorization from the magistrate to hunt them down. Then hunt them somewhere else. They are not here." The man with the crossbow looked between Warren and Grushna, his expression hardening. "You are harboring them. That is a crime. Prove it." Warren crossed his arms. "You see any orcs here? I see my farmhand and her nieces and nephews. Or are you going to tell me who I can and cannot hire to work my own land?" It was a flimsy lie, and everyone knew it, but it was enough to create doubt. The two men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Killing an orc in the wilderness was one thing. Attacking a human landowner's employees on his own property was another matter entirely. "This is not over," the first man finally said. "The magistrate will hear about this." "I am sure he will. Now get off my land." The two men turned their horses and rode away, but not before the one with the crossbow looked back and said, "You are making a mistake, Sawyer. They are animals. They will turn on you the first chance they get." Warren waited until they disappeared over the hill before his knees buckled. Grushna caught him with one strong arm, holding him upright. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her hands already checking him for injuries. "No, I am fine. Are you? Are the children?" "We are unharmed. I heard the horses and got everyone outside so we could run if needed." Her voice shook despite her attempts to sound calm. "Warren, they were going to kill us. I know." He turned to face her fully, gripping her shoulders. "I am so sorry. I should have been here. You could not have known they would come." Grushna's amber eyes were wide and frightened. "What do we do now? They will come back or send others. You cannot fight the whole magistrate's office." Warren's mind raced. She was right. The hunters would report to the magistrate and questions would be asked. At best, Warren would be fined for harboring fugitives. At worst, he would be arrested and Grushna and the children would be killed, unless there was another option. "We leave," he said suddenly. "We pack what we can carry and we go west, over the mountains. I have heard there are settlements there, places where humans and orcs live together in peace." "Warren, no, this is your home, your family's land. It is just land. It is not worth your lives." Grushna stared at him and something shifted in her expression, something warm and wondering and almost frightened. "You would give up everything for us?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation, and Warren realized it was the truest thing he had ever said. Somewhere over the long winter months, Grushna and the children had stopped being strangers he was helping and had become something infinitely more precious. They had become his. Why? Grushna's voice broke on the word. Why do you care so much? Warren reached up and cupped her face with both hands, feeling the warmth of her green skin beneath his palms. Because when I think about my life without you and the children in it, it feels empty. Because you make me laugh. Because the way you hum to Tusk when he has nightmares is the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. Because I... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Grushna's eyes were bright with tears, her expression open and vulnerable in a way he had never seen. Because you what? She whispered. Because I love you. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Then Grushna surged forward and kissed him, her tusks bumping awkwardly against his cheeks, her hands fisting in his shirt. Warren wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back, tasting salt from her tears and something wild and sweet beneath. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grushna rested her forehead against his. I love you too, she said. I have loved you since you gave us your quilt. I just did not think I was allowed to. You are allowed. You are allowed anything. Warren kissed her again, softer this time. Will you come west with me? Will you let me try to build a life with you? Yes, Grushna said, and then she laughed, the sound bright and joyful. Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. Yes. Are you two going to kiss more or can we have breakfast? Kala's voice piped up from near the house. Because I am very hungry. Warren and Grushna broke apart, both flushing. The three children stood watching them with expressions ranging from amused to confused. Tusk's thumb was firmly planted in his mouth. Breakfast, Warren said, clearing his throat. Right. Let us have breakfast and then we will plan. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Warren sold everything he could not carry to a trader who asked no questions and paid in silver that would fund their journey west. He packed their most essential supplies, warm clothes and weapons. Grushna fashioned packs that the children could carry, distributing the weight carefully. As the sun set on their last night at the farm, Warren stood in the doorway and looked back at the small stone house that had been his entire world. Grushna came to stand beside him, and he felt her hand slip into his. Are you sad? She asked quietly. A little, he admitted. But I am more excited than sad. Wherever we go, as long as we are together, it will be home. They set out at dawn, 5 figures walking west into the rising sun. The journey was hard. They traveled through forest and over hills, avoiding main roads and towns where Grushna's appearance would attract unwanted attention. They slept under the stars and rationed their food carefully. Fen twisted his ankle crossing a stream, and they had to rest for 3 days while it healed. Kala developed a fever that left Warren and Grushna taking turns holding her through feverish nights, bathing her forehead with cool water until the fever finally broke. But there were good moments, too. Teaching the children to fish in mountain streams, their delighted shrieks when they caught their first trout. Grushna singing old orc songs around the campfire, her voice rising and falling in haunting melodies. The night Warren asked Grushna to marry him, using a ring he had carved from a piece of oak, and she said yes with tears streaming down her face. They traveled for 6 weeks before they finally crossed into the Western Territories. The landscape changed gradually, the dense forests giving way to rolling grasslands dotted with small settlements. And it was there, in a valley green with spring growth, that they found their destination. The town was called Harmony's Rest, and it lived up to its name. Humans and orcs walked the streets together, trading in the market, working side by side in the fields. Warren saw orc children playing with human children, saw a mixed couple holding hands as they strolled past a bakery. His heart, which had been tight with anxiety for weeks, finally began to ease. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a cheerful older woman who did not even blink at Grushna's appearance. That night, after the children were asleep, Warren and Grushna sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. "We made it," Grushna said softly. "We actually made it." "Did you doubt we would, every single day?" She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But you never did. You just kept going, kept believing we would find somewhere safe. How did you stay so sure?" "Because I had you." Warren kissed the top of her head. "With you beside me, I felt like I could do anything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night. Then Grushna spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "What do we do now? Now we build our life. We find work, we find a place to live. We raise the children, we get married." He grinned at her. "We live happily ever after, just like in the stories." Grushna laughed, but her eyes were serious. "Real life is not like stories." "Maybe not, but I think we can make it pretty close." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Warren found work as a farmhand on a large cooperative farm outside town, his experience with crops and animals making him valuable immediately. Grushna was hired at the same farm, her strength and tireless work ethic earning respect from the other workers. They saved every copper they could, living frugally in the boarding house while they planned for the future. The children thrived in Harmony's rest. Kala enrolled in the town school and threw herself into learning with fierce determination. Fen made friends with a human boy who lived down the street, the two of them becoming inseparable. Even little Tusk came out of his shell, his laughter ringing through the boarding house as he played with the other children staying there. 3 months after their arrival, Warren and Grushna had saved enough to rent a small cottage on the edge of town. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a tiny garden, but it was theirs. They moved in on a sunny morning in late summer, the children racing through the empty rooms and claiming spaces for their beds. That evening, Warren and Grushna stood in their new kitchen, surveying the modest space with deep satisfaction. "It is perfect," Grushna said. "It is a start." Warren pulled her close. "We will make it better, together." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the town's chapel. The priest, a gray-haired human with kind eyes, pronounced them husband and wife without a trace of judgment or hesitation. Kala, Fen, and Tusk stood as witnesses, all 3 dressed in new clothes that Warren and Grushna had splurged on for the occasion. When Warren kissed his new wife, the children cheered, and Tusk threw flower petals he had been clutching in his small fists. The wedding feast was held in their cottage, attended by their new friends and neighbors. An elderly orc woman who worked at the farm brought a traditional orc wedding cake, dense and sweet and flavored with honey. A human couple who lived next door gifted them a set of dishes. Their landlord, a half-orc merchant with a booming laugh, provided several bottles of wine and led the group in increasingly ridiculous toasts. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Warren and Grushna found themselves alone in their kitchen, washing dishes side by side. The children had fallen asleep in a pile in their room, exhausted from excitement. "I never thought I would have this," Grushna said quietly, her hands stilling in the wash water. "A home, a husband, a family that is safe and happy. When my clan cast me out, I thought my life was over." Warren dried his hands and turned her to face him. "Your life was not over, it was just beginning. Because you found us in your root cellar. Best day of my life." He kissed her softly. "Well, second best. Today was the best." Grushna smiled, that beautiful smile that transformed her entire face. "You are a ridiculous romantic, Warren Sawyer." "And you love me for it, Grushna Sawyer." "I do," she said, "more than I ever thought possible." They stood together in their small kitchen, wrapped in each other's arms, and Warren thought about the long, strange journey that had brought them to this moment. From the shock of finding a desperate orc woman and 3 starving children in his root cellar to the warmth of holding his wife in their own home, it seemed like a lifetime had passed. In some ways, it had. The man he had been before, lonely and isolated on his remote farm, felt like a stranger. That man could never have imagined the richness and joy that his life held now. Outside, the sounds of Harmony's rest settling in for the night drifted through the open window. A dog barked somewhere. Children laughed. Someone played a fiddle, the notes bright and cheerful. It was the sound of community, of belonging, of home. The seasons turned, and their little family flourished. Warren and Grushna worked hard, saving their earnings and investing in their future. After a year, they had enough to buy a small plot of land on the outskirts of town. It was only 5 acres, nothing like the sprawling farm Warren had inherited from his father, but it was theirs, purchased with their own labor and free of the shadows of the past. They built a house together, Warren providing the carpentry skills while Grushna did the heavy lifting. The children helped where they could, Kala carefully measuring boards, Fen holding nails, Tusk mostly getting in the way but doing it with such enthusiasm that no one minded. Their neighbors came to help raise the walls and set the roof, making it a community effort. By the time autumn arrived, the house stood complete, a sturdy structure of wood and stone with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a fireplace built from river rocks. Grushna planted a garden that first spring, her hands gentle as she tucked seeds into the dark earth. She grew vegetables familiar from her childhood in the mountains alongside the crops Warren knew from his farming days. The result was a strange and wonderful mix, rows of turnips beside mountain tubers, beans climbing poles next to a sprawling orc melon vine. "It is like us," Warren observed one evening as they surveyed the garden together. "Different things growing side by side, making something new." "That is very poetic for a farmer," Grushna teased. "I have a poet's soul hidden under all this dirt and calluses." She laughed and kissed him, and Warren marveled as he always did that he got to do this, to hold this remarkable woman and call her his wife. The children grew. Kala shot up like a weed, all long limbs and fierce intelligence. She discovered a passion for numbers, and began apprenticing with the town's accountant, her quick mind making her invaluable for managing the complex trades and accounts. Fen, quieter and more contemplative, found his calling working with animals. He had a gift for understanding them, for soothing spooked horses and coaxing sick calves back to health. The local veterinarian took him on as an assistant, and Fen bloomed under the attention and praise. Tusk remained the baby of the family, though he protested loudly whenever anyone called him that. He started school and proved to be a natural storyteller, entertaining his classmates with elaborate tales of adventure and heroism. His teachers said he had a gift for words, and Warren made sure to buy him every book he could afford. On evenings when the work was done, the 5 of them would gather around the fireplace. Warren would read aloud while Grushna mended clothes or knitted, her needles clicking rhythmically. The children would sprawl on the floor, listening with rapt attention to adventures in far-off lands. Those moments, simple and domestic and perfect, were Warren's favorite. 2 years after they built their house, Grushna told Warren she was pregnant. "Are you happy?" she asked nervously, watching his face. They stood in the garden, the evening sun painting everything gold. "I know we never really talked about having children of our own. I do not even know if orc and human children are possible." The midwife says she has delivered 3 such babies in Harmony's Rest, and they were all healthy, but Warren cut off her nervous rambling with a kiss. When he pulled back, he was grinning so wide his face hurt. "I am so happy I could burst," he said. "A baby, our baby." "Grushna, this is wonderful." Relief flooded her features. "You are sure? It will be complicated. Half-orc children sometimes face prejudice, even here. Then we will teach our child to be strong and proud just like their mother." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, which was still flat but held their future within. "We will love them fiercely and raise them well, and anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." Grushna's eyes filled with tears. "How did I get so lucky? How did I find the one human in the world with a heart big enough to love an orc and her nieces and nephews and now our own child? I am not the only one. Look around this town. There are dozens of families like us, humans and orcs building lives together." Warren wiped away her tears with his thumbs. "We are not unique. We are just brave enough to choose love over fear." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grushna remained strong and healthy, working in the garden until she was too large to bend comfortably. The midwife, a competent half-orc woman named Marta, visited regularly and pronounced everything normal. Kala threw herself into preparing for the baby with characteristic intensity, reading every book on infant care she could find. Fen built a beautiful cradle from oak wood, carving it with protective symbols from both human and orc traditions. Tusk announced to anyone who would listen that he was going to be the best big brother in the entire world. Warren found himself gripped by anxiety as Grushna's due date approached. He had never been a father before, not really. He loved Kala, Fen, and Tusk fiercely, but they had come to him already formed, with personalities and memories and lives of their own. This baby would be entirely new, entirely dependent on him and Grushna to shape and guide and protect. "You are terrified," Grushna said one night, finding him pacing the bedroom instead of sleeping. "Is it that obvious? You have been checking the baby supplies for the 5th time tonight. I think we have enough cloth diapers, Warren." He sat down on the bed beside her, running his hands through his hair. "What if I am a terrible father? What if I do everything wrong?" Grushna took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. Beneath his palm he felt a strong kick and his breath caught. "You will make mistakes," she said gently. "All parents do. But you will love this child with everything you have, and you will try your best, and that is all any child needs. Look at what you have done for Kala, Fen, and Tusk. You took in 3 strange orc children without hesitation and gave them a home and a future. You are already a father, Warren. You have been for years. That was different. I did not have a choice with them. I saw 3 hungry children and I had to help. And when this baby cries at midnight, hungry and wet and inconsolable, you will not have a choice then either. You will get up and you will help because that is who you are." She squeezed his hand. "Stop being afraid of your own goodness. Accept that you are a kind, generous, loving man, and our child is lucky to have you." Warren felt the knot of anxiety in his chest loosen. He leaned over and kissed Grushna's forehead, then her lips, then the swell of her belly. "I love you," he said. "All of you." Their daughter was born on a crisp autumn morning, arriving with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at the cold world she had entered. She had Grushna's green skin and Warren's dark hair, tiny tusks barely visible when she yawned, and fingers so small and perfect that Warren wept when he first held her. "She is beautiful," he whispered, gazing down at the bundle in his arms. "She is perfect." Grushna, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at them from the bed. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. Grushna wanted an orc name to honor her heritage. Warren wanted something that would help their daughter fit into human society. In the end, they compromised. Willow, Warren said. For strength and flexibility, able to bend in the wind but never break, and her middle name can be Grishka after your mother. Willow Grishka Sawyer, Grushna tested the name, rolling it around her mouth. Then she smiled. It is perfect. She is perfect. Kala, Fen, and Tusk were allowed to meet their new sister that afternoon. They crowded around the bed, eyes wide with wonder, taking turns gently touching Willow's tiny hands. She is so small, Tusk breathed. Was I that small? Smaller, Grushna assured him. You all were. I am going to protect her forever, Kala declared with fierce certainty. No one is ever going to hurt her. We will all protect her, Warren said. We are a family. We take care of each other. The days blurred together in those first weeks of Willow's life. Warren and Grushna stumbled through in an exhausted haze of feeding and changing and soothing. Willow was a good baby for the most part, but she had her father's stubborn streak and would not sleep unless she was being held. Warren spent countless hours pacing the floor with her, singing off key lullabies while Grushna tried to snatch a few hours of rest. Their friends and neighbors rallied around them. Marta the midwife stopped by daily to check on Grushna and the baby. Their neighbor brought over meals so Grushna would not have to cook. The children helped where they could, Kala proving surprisingly adept at soothing Willow when she was fussy. Slowly, they found their rhythm. Willow began sleeping for longer stretches. Grushna healed from the birth and regained her strength. Warren learned to change a diaper one-handed and navigate the complexities of infant care. Life settled into a new normal, richer and fuller than before. On Willow's first birthday, they threw a party that filled their house to bursting. Friends from all over Harmony's Rest came to celebrate, bringing gifts and food and good wishes. Willow, overwhelmed by the attention, clung to Warren's neck and refused to let go, occasionally peeking out to survey the crowd with wide eyes. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Warren found himself standing in the doorway with Willow drowsing against his shoulder, watching Grushna laugh at something Marta had said. Kala was helping clean up with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. Fen and Tusk were playing a game in the corner with some of the other children, their laughter bright and carefree. This was his life. This was his family. And it was more than he had ever dreamed possible. What are you thinking about? Grushna asked, coming to stand beside him once the last guest had left. About a root cellar, Warren said. About finding you and the children there, cold and scared and desperate. About how that moment changed everything. Grushna leaned her head on his shoulder, careful not to disturb Willow. Do you ever regret it, taking us in, leaving your farm, your whole life behind? Never. Not once. Warren shifted Willow to one arm so he could put the other around his wife. You are my life. This family is my life. Everything before was just waiting for you to arrive. That is terribly romantic. I told you, I have a poet's soul. They stood together in the doorway as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and gold. Inside, Kala was directing Fen and Tusk in cleaning up the party debris, her voice carrying the fond exasperation of an older sister. Willow snored softly against Warren's chest, completely at peace. We should get her to bed, Grushna said reluctantly. In a minute. I just want to hold this moment a little longer. Because this was happiness. Not the dramatic, sweep you off your feet kind found in stories, but the quiet, everyday kind built from 1,000 small choices to be kind, to be patient, to be loving. It was messy and exhausting and sometimes frustrating, but it was real and it was theirs and it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years continued to roll past like a river flowing steadily toward the sea. Kala finished her apprenticeship and opened her own small accounting office in town. her reputation for precision and fairness drawing clients from miles around. She moved into a small apartment above her office, though she came home for dinner every Sunday without fail. At 23, she began courting a young human man who worked as a clerk for the magistrate, and Warren had to swallow his protective instincts when he saw how happy the young man made his eldest daughter. Fenn took over the veterinary practice when his mentor retired, his gentle manner and skilled hands making him beloved by every farmer in the region. He never married, seeming content with his animals and his work, though Warren suspected there was a young Orc woman who worked at the grain mill who might change his mind eventually. Fenn remained quiet about such things, keeping his own counsel as always. Tusk, true to his childhood passion, became a teacher at the town school. His gift for storytelling translated into a talent for making even the driest subjects come alive for his students. At 19, he was the youngest teacher the school had ever hired, and the children adored him. He still lived at home, claiming he was saving money, though Warren suspected he simply was not ready to leave yet. Willow grew into a spirited child who inherited her mother's strength and her father's stubborn determination. She was fiercely proud of her mixed heritage, never shying away from her green skin or small tusks. When other children occasionally made cruel comments, she responded with such withering logic that they never dared repeat their mistakes. She declared at age 7 that she was going to be a doctor, and nothing Warren or Grushna said could dissuade her from this goal. Warren himself found contentment in the simple rhythms of their small farm. He grew crops and raised a few animals, nothing on the scale of his father's operation, but enough to keep them comfortable and provide extra produce to sell at the market. His hair began to gray at the temples, and laugh lines deepened around his eyes. He was happy in a way he had never imagined possible during his lonely years in that isolated farmhouse, 12 miles from any neighbor. On the 10th anniversary of their arrival in Harmony's Rest, the whole family gathered for a celebration dinner. Kala brought her beau, a nervous young man named Thomas who clearly adored her. Fenn arrived with a basket of fresh bread from the mill, confirming Warren's suspicions about the grain mill worker. Tusk regaled them with stories about his students' latest antics. Willow demonstrated the stitches she had been practicing on pieces of cloth, determined to master suturing before she was old enough to apprentice with the town doctor. After dinner, as they all sat around the fireplace in comfortable fullness, Grushna cleared her throat. "I have something to say," she announced. Everyone turned to look at her, and she seemed suddenly nervous, her hands fidgeting with her skirt. "Warren and I have been talking, and we have decided something. We want to tell you all together." Warren reached over and took her hand, squeezing reassuringly. She gave him a grateful look before continuing. "You all know my story. You know I was cast out from my clan for refusing to abandon Kala, Fenn, and Tusk. For years, I believed that was the end of my connection to Orc culture, to my heritage. But recently, I have been thinking that maybe it does not have to be." She paused, gathering her words. "There is a new Orc settlement being established in the mountains north of here. It is being founded on different principles than the old clans. Cooperation instead of dominance. Inclusion instead of exile. They have invited any Orcs who wish to connect with their heritage to visit, to learn the old ways, to be part of a community." "You want to go," Kala said quietly. "I want us all to go, not to live there but to visit, to learn, to understand where half of this family comes from." Grushna looked around at each of them. "I want Willow to grow up knowing Orc stories and Orc songs and Orc traditions. I want Kala, Fenn, and Tusk to reconnect with a heritage that was stolen from them. I want all of us to be whole." Tusk was nodding enthusiastically. I think it is a wonderful idea. I could learn traditional orc tales to share with my students. I would like to understand orc animal husbandry techniques, Fen added thoughtfully. I have read that orcs have different approaches to breeding and care that might be useful. Kala looked at Thomas, who squeezed her hand supportively, then back at Grushna. I think I would like that. To see where we come from, who we might have been. All eyes turned to Willow, who had been uncharacteristically quiet. The 10-year-old looked up at her mother with solemn eyes. Will they accept me? She asked in a small voice. I am only half orc. Grushna knelt beside her daughter's chair and cupped her face gently. They will love you because you are wonderful and brave and kind. And if they do not, then that is their loss and we will leave. But I think they will. I think they will see you the way I do, the way your father does, the way your whole family does, as something precious and perfect. Willow nodded slowly, then smiled. Okay, let us go meet the orcs. The journey to the mountain settlement took 3 days. They traveled as a family, the 7 of them plus Thomas, who Kala had insisted join them. The settlement was called New Haven, and it sprawled across a high valley with stunning views of the surrounding peaks. Unlike the traditional orc clan structures Warren had heard about, which were built for defense and dominance, New Haven featured open, welcoming architecture designed to encourage community and cooperation. They were greeted by an elderly orc woman named Grandmother Shara, who held the position of settlement elder. She embraced Grushna like a long-lost daughter, and Warren saw his wife's eyes fill with tears at the gesture. Welcome home, Shara said. All of you. Human and orc and those blessed enough to be both, you are all welcome here. They spent a week in New Haven, and it transformed something in all of them. Grushna reconnected with traditions she thought she had lost forever, learning old songs and dances and crafts. Kala, Fen, and Tusk soaked up knowledge about their heritage with a hunger Warren had not anticipated. Even Willow, initially shy, blossomed under the attention of the settlement's children, who accepted her without question. Warren himself found unexpected kinship with the humans who had married into the orc community or were raising half-orc children. They shared stories and strategies, commiserating over the challenges and celebrating the joys. He realized he was not alone in this journey, that there was a whole community of people navigating the same complicated waters. On their last night in New Haven, there was a bonfire celebration. The whole settlement gathered, and Grandmother Shara invited Grushna to speak. Warren watched his wife stand before the assembled crowd, her green skin glowing in the firelight, her head held high and proud. She spoke about her journey from exile to belonging, about the human man who had found her in a root cellar and chosen love over fear, about the family they had built from scraps and hope. I spent years believing I had to choose, Grushna said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. That I could be orc or I could be safe, but not both. That I could honor my heritage or protect my children, but not both. That I could love a human or hold onto my culture, but not both. But standing here in this place, with my whole family beside me, I realized that was a lie. We do not have to choose. We can be all of ourselves, complicated and contradictory and whole. We can build something new that honors where we came from while embracing where we are going. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Warren felt pride swell in his chest so fierce it almost hurt. That was his wife. That incredible, brave, beautiful woman was his wife. They returned to Harmony's Rest changed. Grushna began teaching orc traditions to anyone interested, holding weekly gatherings at their home. Willow announced she wanted to learn orc combat techniques in addition to her medical studies, insisting that a good doctor should know how to defend her patients. Tusk incorporated orc stories, into his teaching curriculum. Fenn began experimenting with orc farming methods on their small plot of land. Life continued, rich and full and complex. There were challenges, of course. Prejudice still existed, even in tolerant harmony's rest. Willow came home crying one day because a shopkeeper had refused to serve her. Kala faced resistance from some clients who did not trust an orc's mathematical skills. But they faced each challenge as a family, supporting each other through the hard moments and celebrating the victories. On Warren's 40th birthday, Grushna gave him a gift that left him speechless. It was a painting, commissioned from a local artist, depicting 5 figures: a human man, an orc woman, and 3 small orc children standing in front of a root cellar. The detail was extraordinary, capturing not just their appearances but something ineffable about that moment: the fear, the desperation, the faint glimmer of hope. "So we never forget where we started," Grushna said softly, "and how far we have come." Warren hung the painting in a place of honor in their living room, where he could see it every day. And every day, he marveled at the impossible, wonderful journey that had brought him from loneliness to this abundance of love. More years passed. Kala married Thomas in a beautiful ceremony that blended human and orc traditions. A year later, she gave Warren and Grushna their first grandchild, a baby girl with her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's gentle nature. Fenn finally admitted his feelings for the grain mill worker, a lovely orc woman named Bresla, and their courtship was the talk of the town for months. Tusk was promoted to headmaster of the school, his innovative teaching methods drawing attention from educators across the region. Willow achieved her dream of becoming a doctor, apprenticing with the town physician and eventually taking over his practice when he retired. She became known for her skill and compassion, treating human and orc patients with equal dedication. At 25, she married a half-orc blacksmith named Goram, and their wedding was such a joyous celebration that people talked about it for years. Warren and Grushna grew old together, their hair graying and their bodies slowing, but their love only deepening with time. They spent their days tending their garden, visiting their grandchildren, and sitting on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Warren took Grushna back to the root cellar on their old farm. The property had changed hands several times over the years, but the current owner, a young family, graciously allowed them to visit when Warren explained the significance. The cellar looked smaller than Warren remembered, the earthen walls more crumbled. But standing there with Grushna's hand in his, he could still see it all so clearly: the frightened orc woman, the 3 starving children, the moment he chose kindness over fear. "You remember what you asked me that first day," Warren said. "You asked why I was helping you, what I wanted." "I remember. I could not believe you wanted nothing." "I got everything," Warren said simply. "Everything that matters. You, our children, our grandchildren, this life we built together, all from one moment of choosing to be kind." Grushna leaned against him, and they stood together in the root cellar where their story began, surrounded by the ghosts of who they used to be and the reality of who they had become. "Thank you," she whispered, "for finding us, for saving us, for loving us." "Thank you for letting me," Warren replied. They left the root cellar hand in hand, walking back into the sunlight together. Behind them, the old structure settled into its foundation, holding their secrets and their beginnings like a treasure. Ahead of them, their children and grandchildren waited in the farmhouse for the anniversary celebration, their laughter and voices carrying on the wind. Warren had started his adult life 12 miles from any neighbor, isolated and alone. He had ended up surrounded by family, part of a community, his life so full of love that sometimes it overwhelmed him. All because one desperate winter, he had found an orc woman and her 3 children living in his root cellar and made the simple, radical choice to help. It was not a decision he had ever regretted. Not for a single moment. As they walked toward the farmhouse, Warren looked over at Grushna, his wife, his partner, his best friend, the love of his life. She caught him looking and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, amused. "Nothing. I just love you." "I love you too, you ridiculous man." They walked on together into the gathering dusk, into the house full of their children and grandchildren, into the warm embrace of the family they had built from nothing but hope and stubbornness and love. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, and Warren thought about stories and how they ended. Happily ever after, he had once told Grushna. Just like in the stories, he had been right. Their story had a happy ending. Not because everything was perfect or because they never faced challenges, but because they faced them together. Because they chose each other every single day. Because love, real love, was not a destination but a journey, and they had walked it hand in hand for 30 years and would walk it for whatever years remained. Inside the farmhouse, someone started playing a fiddle. Children's laughter rang out, bright and clear. Grushna squeezed Warren's hand, and together they stepped through the door into the light and warmth and noise of their family. This was their happy ending. This moment and all the moments that had come before and all the moments still to come. Together, always together, from that first day in the root cellar to this perfect evening and beyond. Warren Sawyer had found an orc woman and her 3 children living in his root cellar, 12 miles from any neighbor, and that discovery had given him everything worth having in life. It was a simple story, really. A story about kindness and courage and the transformative power of love, and like all the best stories, it was true.